Hi, and welcome to the Punk CX podcast. My name is Adrian Swinsko, and I'm an advisor, best-selling author, speaker, and general explorer when it comes to customer and employee experience. I'm really interested in figuring out what it takes to build organizations that produce better outcomes for both customers and employees. So with that in mind, I seek out and interview CEOs, entrepreneurs, business and tech leaders, authors and academics to uncover some clues about what it takes to build such an organization. Now, some of you may know the podcast as the Rare Business Podcast, but I decided to rename and rebrand the podcast recently. This is for a number of reasons. First one was to mirror the title of my book, Punk CX, which was published in June 2019. Two, because I'm a fan of punk music. And three, it's just more fun, right? Anyway, if this is your first time listening to one of these interviews, then hello and welcome. And please do dive into the archives at adrianswinsko.com, as I've now completed over 300 of these interviews in the last few years. If this is not your first time listening, then welcome back and thank you. Anyway, that's enough from me right now. Let's get into the interview. Before we do that, I'd like to say a big thank you to the folks at Pega for sponsoring my podcast for the coming month. If you don't know Pega, they are a low-code platform for AI-powered decisioning and workflow automation. Its scalable architecture helps the world's leading organizations work smarter, unify experiences, and adapt instantly, so they're always ready for what's next. They've also got their annual conference, Pega World Inspire, coming up, which will focus on how to address constantly shifting perspectives in an ever-evolving world, including guidance, strategies, and powerful tools to achieve resiliency in the face of rapid change. Now, the event will be held virtually on May the 24th from 9 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time, which will be for the Americas and European regions, and then again on May the 25th from 10 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time for the Asia Pacific region. The agenda and registration details can all be found at pegaworld.com. Do check it out, and I hope to see you there. Now, let's get into the interview. So welcome to the next edition of the Punk CX podcast. With me today, I have Sam Richardson, who is a visioneering, no less, in brackets. The no less bit in brackets, that is, visioneering consultant for Twilio. Hey, Sam, how are you doing?
Hey, hi, Adrian. I'm good, thank you. How about you?
I am splendid, thank you. I'm splendid. So, Sam, with a title like that, you have to explain what that means, and you have to kind of give us a bit of a thumbnail sketch and a bit of a backstory to Sam Richardson, if you will.
I will. Only in California would somebody be a visioneering consultant, which, I work for a Californian tech company. So I think that tells you what you need to know about that. But
I bet you don't share that with anybody down the pub in Newcastle, though, do you?
No, I do not tell them that. I've had very mixed response, but it always gets a response, which I really like. Mm-hmm. Bit of backstory. I've been working in contact center, customer service and customer experience transformation for about 25 years or so. At Twilio, what I do is help customers think about what they want to build. Because the great thing with Twilio is it is an API platform. So it provides you with all the building blocks that you need to build differentiated customer experience. Plus, we have a data platform that weaves into that as well to make it really special. You're probably using Twilio every day and don't realise, because we powered about 1 trillion interactions through our platforms last year. So it's one of those companies that you'll no doubt be using. You just don't know that you are.
Splendid. Would that put you firmly in the CPaaS?
It does, yeah.
So communication platform as a service.
Yeah, that's us.
Perfect. There you go. Pin in the map. Yeah, that's where you are at.
That's where we are.
Super. Now, we had a chat a wee while ago. I call it chat. It's more of a mutual kind of rant. Sort of, it's a bit like a ranting tennis. So like going, your go. Kind of across the net. And you said a couple of things which I just thought I wrote down and made a note of. And you said one thing which you said, many people don't think very much about customer engagement until they are struggling to access a service. And I thought that was really fascinating and really insightful. And I wanted to just almost go back to that and replay it and ask you to kind of explain what you meant by that, because I just think it's a really useful kind of nugget to sort of dwell on for a little while.
Yeah, always surprise myself sometimes. So I think, brands don't mean to us what brands think they do. I mean, we're not sat waiting for them to engage with us, and they're not top of mind for us. We go about our business every day, getting what we need, doing the transactions that we need, and not really thinking too much about it, or we shouldn't have to think too much about it and the only time we do is when we really struggle with something. So I think it's just the same as our everyday conversations, right? We don't think too much about all the chats that we have and all the conversations that we have until we can't reach somebody, or until we need to communicate something urgently, or until something's gone wrong and we desperately need to talk to somebody about it. And then all of a sudden that conversation becomes really important. And I think it's the same with the conversations that we have with brands. Only brands don't seem to have the same reciprocal respect for that relationship and that urgency. So I think that in general, we go about our everyday business. We have our conversations, whether that's a verbal one, a written one, or a transactional one. And it's only when we can't reach somebody or we can't get that access and we really need to engage with somebody do we then start questioning our relationship with them. Why aren't they there for me when I need them? Why can't we engage? And I think it kind of then throws it up into sort of really clear view.
Yeah, because when we were talking about it, we dug into that because I know it's something that I'm really interested in, and you are too. You went on to talk about how many brands don't take an inclusive approach to customer engagement, and that's sort of exacerbated when you have these kind of collisions. Why aren't you here? Why don't you make this easy for me? I mean, backstory to this, I was like going, I thought it was funny when on the back of everything that happened in 2020 and the sort of shining a spotlight on the disparities that they were kind of there and how things weren't inclusive and all this sort of stuff, you're like, God, yeah, no shit, Sherlock. And then Forrester, love him, kind of came out with this big statement that said 2021 is going to be the year of inclusive CX. I nearly snorted my coffee out of my nose at the time. I'm like, so does that mean it wasn't before? And I was a bit like, oh, crumbs. And so it's not, and it still isn't in large part. I mean, there's some really good stuff on there. I mean, like our phones, many people kind of don't know, have some brilliant accessibility sort of functionality kind of in them that really kind of help you, whether it's not widely kind of like known, but the sort of general kind of brand experiences that you get put in front of them. If you put different lenses, adopt different lenses to look at them, you just go, yeah, that's not going to work for X person or Y person or whatever it is. So why is it that brands don't take an inclusive approach to customer engagement? And why? So what is it costing them?
I think there's a number of reasons why they don't. I think first of all is the drive for efficiency, right? Because we're kind of obsessed with the word digital. And the financial benefits, the unicorn-like financial benefits that we think it's going to bring us by pushing everything digitally. And I think that people kind of go very much on that one-track mind. I think that there's probably not enough diversity in people that are designing these services and experiences as well. I mean, if you think about the average working age or the average designer, I did some... when we look at the population, right, 30% or nearly 40% is over 40, then you've got 30% that's under 20. So that's this gap then of, a smaller proportion who's probably designing services for people. Then overlay in the fact that, there's about 14 million people with disabilities in this country. There's people who are unemployed. The average reading age is 9 years old. There's all these factors to consider that I just don't think that they're factored into design. And I don't think it's some of it's intentional. There's this whole regard for people of a certain age who are apparently digital laggards, which I think is rude. There are some, but also people just don't do it. It's not in their design processes. They just add channels. They decide that, a WhatsApp chatbot cul-de-sac is a really good thing to do because we don't want people contacting us without any real, people just, it's that blind ignorance, I think, in some ways. It's just a real lack of inclusivity and diversity in the way that we actually think about and design services. I think does that mean you talk about digital and this drive for efficiency? Yeah. Does that mean like efficiency, drive for efficiency also equals being slightly lazy? And I think it does, and really unimaginative as well. Right. Because we just do what, we just take something and kind of go, I don't know, we just build almost what's expected of it rather than really using our imagination. We ran an IVR Innovation Day the other week. And myself, as running a design morning, my builder friend, my dev friends then built what we decided to design. We got a group of customers together and just let them kind of like go wild with their imagination. And considering a particular customer scenario, ask them to build a great IVR experience, because it doesn't have to be terrible. And given that freedom and giving them permission to be creative, they came up with wonderful, very caring solutions for customers that didn't once utter, did you know you could go online? Or, you are 20th in the queue. What does that mean? So I think that there's some of that as well. I think that there's a lack of kind of leadership giving people permission to be more inclusive with the design. There's not enough emphasis on research, because data and research is not the same thing. Understanding how somebody lives every single day and being with a variety of different users of your services is a very different thing to just looking at a data set of people that are already using your service. And I just think, there's the diversity in the people that are designing, actually even thinking we are going to very intentionally design this service rather than just stick a channel on or try to deflect some contact away from the contact center would be kind of a really good start. Yeah. I just want to, you said something that reminded me of something that Richard Hammond said, not the Richard Hammond out of Top Gear, kind of like, but Richard Hammond. I know the one you mean. Richard Hammond is CEO of Uncrowd, who he said a brilliant thing. So he was one of the contributors to the latest book I wrote, the Punk XL, and he makes a brilliant point, and something that you just mirrored then, which was, he says, it's nonsense to think that the data that you get from your customers represents the voice of your customer. Because what you end up doing is it's a subset. These are people that transact with you, but you're ignoring everybody else who could be your potential customer or doesn't respond or all these other kind of things. So it's like you don't get a whole picture. It's a very partial picture. Yeah. And so if you want to really understand and grow your footprint, you actually have to look beyond, as you say, look beyond the data and do the proper kind of research to understand the whole kind of picture and all the nuances from that. But so I just wanted to point that out slightly. And also, Rich is a friend of the podcast, and so a big shout out to the folks at Uncrowd. I think they're doing they are. I'm a big fan of Richard too. So there you go. We're all in good company. Excellent. So given all of that, so I mean, what should you talked about data and research. I mean, what should they be doing more of? I mean, what is that, or instead? I mean, I remember when we talked as well, you talked about rather than take this happy path, you should adopt this helpfulness mindset. Well, what do you kind of mean by that? I think there's two things. So this helpfulness mindset and also looking at the unhappy path. We're kind of afraid to look at the unhappy path or even address problems, but these are good things, because without problems, we haven't got anything to solve. This is what humans love to do. But I think if we had this, I see, and I work with all sorts of different companies, right? From very early startups right the way through to mature enterprises. And the one thing that they all do is really focus on what the happy path would be and map a customer journey to the happy path, and then don't unpick that to say, right, what could go wrong here?
Right.
And kind of, I like to run a workshop focused on what's going to go wrong. What are all the things that could go horribly wrong here that we need to think about and design for? And it's almost like a shock to people. It's like, what? Why are we talking about these things? It's almost like we're not allowed to talk about what goes wrong. But I do think that doing both that, thinking about, or maybe it's three things: thinking about what could go wrong, thinking about unintended consequences as well, which is harder, but there are some, and then having this helpfulness mindset as to what actually would be really helpful for the customer in this instance would go a long way. I was talking to somebody from a famous high street bank that I'm not allowed, I don't know if I can mention, but I might mention them later. And they were explaining a wonderful thing that they're doing, which is now, instead of call listening with agents to critique the agents on what they should or shouldn't have done, they actually do this collective call listening to monitor the customer journey and say, what are the bits of the customer journey that we could have improved and that we can make a difference on here that will make the call better, make the interaction better, or even, stop the interaction happening full stop. And I thought that was a brilliant approach.
That's really interesting.
It's really interesting, isn't it? And I think more of that, because that is a helpfulness mindset. What could we do here to help the customer, rather than what should the agent have done differently?
I think that's absolutely right, because what it doesn't do is it doesn't assume that what you've currently got is right.
Yeah.
And therefore, if you're then monitoring the agent, then you're looking for, because then you come at a point of, you start from a point of almost like they're wrong, and how can they be better, sort of thing. But actually, if you think about it the other way, as you can say, you're looking at it and just going, well, let's just listen and understand how it can be better, where the problems were, kind of who's where the friction or the grit or the lumpiness or whatever the rocky terrain is, and all of this, and then think about, well, what can we do to address that, and whether that's on agent side or customer side.
And that's where innovation comes from, and creativity. Because those are the little nuggets. Everybody thinks that innovation or creativity are these huge exotic things, but they're not. It's that kind of activity, and then applying that and thinking, oh, well, how could we build this slightly differently then? What could we experiment with? What could we try? What could we do differently? But you can't get to that until you've had that kind of helpfulness mindset to start with. Yeah.
And so I also going to recall that you kind of think that there's a lot to be learned from the way that some not-for-profits kind of take when it comes to understanding their customers or their donors rather, and particularly if they're collecting kind of donations and delivering services that best suit their needs. I mean, so what do you think we can learn from not-for-profits and their approach?
So many not-for-profits take a very user-centered approach because they have to. They are designing for users who are in a vast array of circumstances. It could be like AGK, for example, who we work with.
Just as a point of clarity then, so yes. Just from my understanding, when you can say not-for-profits and you're talking about taking a very user-centered way of designing things, are you talking about people that benefit from the services of the not-for-profits, not necessarily the donors, or is it both-sided? Two sides?
There is a real step change in thinking about donations, mostly driven by competition, because there is so much to donate to now that these organisations are really thinking about, well, how do we reach donors where they are? How do we communicate where they are? So that is definitely a thing. But I think it's really the recipients of the service, because not-for-profits don't have that much money to spend, so need to spend it really wisely. B, they're reaching people in vulnerable circumstances, therefore need to be very thoughtful and intentional about how they're reaching people. But at the same time, they need to be balancing that with reaching as many people as they possibly can. So we work with Age UK, for example, and
Right.
Age UK have this really great service whereby you can like match up with somebody to talk to, and we've been able to work with them to really increase it's very landline based, but it's that being able to connect people through WebRTC, for example. It's simple, it's dead simple.
Yeah.
The solution's simple, but they really thought about their end user and their volunteers and what was best for them to connect as many people as possible. We do a lot of work in crisis response, so with Norwegian Refugee Council, which is connecting people under very difficult circumstances in Afghanistan and in Libya, helping them get to safety. Again, it takes a real understanding of the technology in the country. Have they even got electricity?
Right.
Is a WhatsApp chat going to really reach as many people as possible? Because WhatsApp is a fantastic tool for many, many parts of the world in reaching people. So again, it's really taking that user-centered approach first and thinking what is going to work to connect to as many people as possible in the circumstances that we've got, rather than what commercial companies tend to do, which is think about themselves a lot. So that's why I think that there's a lot we can learn. I mean, not-for-profits always look to the commercial world and think, there must be something that we can learn from them. We must be so behind. But I'm not so sure about that, because, again, they just have a different mindset. It's a different way of looking at it.
No, I like it. It's sort of like a lateral insight in many ways. It's like it's like how many businesses, or small businesses, often look to large businesses for insight, but actually there's just as much innovation and kind of care and insight going on in the small business sector than there is way. So it should be a two-way street. People should be looking not just at their peer group, but actually across the piece to look for where I hate that term, best practice, where excellence kind of lives.
Yeah. Some good inspiration lives.
Yeah, where inspiration lives. So imagine people kind of did all of this sort of stuff, and they looked for inspiration in different places to try to harness their creativity. They made their stuff a bit more, not a bit more, but inclusive and user-centered, human-centered. I mean, what's the payoff of all of this? Because that's kind of, if we're dealing with commercial business, that's the crux, right? They're like going, meh. If it's not nice to have, it's going to get jettisoned at the first opportunity when we kind of get to a commercial kind of pinch point. So what's the ROI on this sort of stuff?
And I think, by the way, that in itself is a bit of an issue. Like, we need to see the return immediately.
Yeah, well, so maybe we can talk about the ROI sort of window as well as kind of like the ROI. So like, it's not just a short game. This is not a quarterly bump, as it were. This is like an investment.
I think it's about spending money wisely. Prior to Twilio, I did some work with one of the financial regulators who were looking at a pretty hefty investment in a new platform. They were re-platforming. But after we did a lot of research, we found out that the key to transformation was actually their content and changing what they were saying and how they were saying. Some very difficult legal information was being shared, but by changing that was transformative. And when they refocused and did that, guess what? Their customer experience absolutely leapt. So again, but that was a fraction of the cost as to what a new digital platform would be.
Yeah.
That only came from doing the research and understanding what really mattered to their users and what the pain points were. So I think that there is definitely a cost benefit to doing that. I think as well, it helps with prioritization. So taking more of that kind of intentional design and user basis is like, all right, well, actually, where are we getting the most pain? Therefore, if we just approach those, then again, it can reap benefits in that sense as well. Plus, then there's the loyalty. And I think loyalty means many different things to many different people, but ultimately it's the retention of people. We know that even like the digital acquisition of customers has risen by about 50% in the last year and is going to get more and more expensive. So retaining customers is very important. It always has been. It always will be. That is key to a business, to a good, healthy business. And I think, again, by really listening to them, understanding what people want, building to that, testing as well, learning, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't work. Again, not thinking of things as the final solution, but iterating as we go along. Again, I think has benefits in that hopefully you can find ways to retain your customers and, keep them spending with you. Because we are lazy as consumers. It's habit.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
It's habit that keeps us loyal. But if you do something terrible and we can't access your services when we need them, surely we'll go somewhere else. And it's never been easier than ever.
Yeah.
So paying attention to that, I think.
I think you kind of so you said something about that, which I think made me think about this idea that you talked about the client that was replatforming or thinking about replatforming. And then they realized actually the content was the problem. And I think there's too much when people talk about CX or just experience in general or kind of digital, or whatever transformation, whatever, pick your buzzword, insert here type of thing. There's a lot of dominant logic that goes on. And it reminds me of this. I'm a collector of quotes, and there's one which is one of my favorites at the moment, which is from Einstein. It says that if you give me an hour to solve a problem, I'll spend 55 minutes thinking about it and 5 minutes solving it. And yet what tends to happen in practice is almost the inverse, that we're always kind of like doing, kind of like trying to switch into fixed mode. I know that I'm guilty of that sometimes. But it also kind of reminds me of a story that I heard from somebody that I met once called Abu Sadiq, and he was working for I think it was GWR, one of the train companies here in the UK. And he was telling me about how they did a reappraisal of some of their content and how they spoke to customers and the words that they used and how they simplified things and all of that type of stuff and how it was just transformative. I think it's fascinating, but it also kind of like tells us a lot about where we kind of need to, what we need to be thinking about, and also where we need to be looking for in terms of the clues. It's not like a bigger spanner is always going to work. It's sometimes it's not the spanner at all. That's the key to this. It might be, like you said, it might be the content, and that's just because it's about the engagement and the communication, and that's the kind of most important sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of fascinating. I think there's real kind of lessons there. Sometimes we need to go slower in order to go faster.
And think smaller.
Yeah. And sometimes we need to wander about before we kind of jump in.
We do. I think this whole notion, you mentioned it, but this whole, sometimes I think, God, I'd love to ban the words digital transformation, because like the whole notion that there's this big transformation that has to happen, when in reality, it's just these smaller improvements every single day using some of the technology that's at our disposal now that we can work with quite quickly, that's going to make the difference. But first of all, you've got to know what it is that's going to make the difference.
So here's a question. So who's up there, do you think? Who's Twilio working with right now that you think, yeah, I think they're doing it all right. They're doing all right, and they might not be getting it right, but they're definitely taking the right approach, and they're kind of like they're marching on, and they're kind of seeing the benefits. I mean, kind of tell me a couple of stories, Sam.
Who's doing really well? This is really difficult to think about. It's always difficult to think about who's doing really well. I think we come into contact with a lot of customers who are really thinking about what it is they want to do. At the moment, I'm working with a really big not-for-profit that is looking at how they can give people digital tools in the most remote countries in the world, which I think is really interesting. The fact that they want to do this, I just completely admire their ambition. I think it's just brilliant. There is a bank who we work with who I think are spectacular, because they genuinely have made this shift to absolutely care about their customer and put their customer. A lot of people talk about customer centricity, but they're really putting their customer at the center of what they do.
And are they one of the challenger banks, or is this an established one that's just kind of had a bit of a lobotomy?
It's an established one that's had a bit of a lobotomy.
Ooh.
So I know. It's fun, eh? So that one's really good. We're working with all sorts of people, interesting ones. I'm working with a company at the moment who is an auction house for one-off items. Like, you could buy a Ferrari, or you could buy a set of spoons, I found out. But what's interesting is the way they're thinking about the buyer and seller relationship and how they can communicate with each other, but listen at the same time, so that if a problem occurs, they know that's how they can intervene and then start. It's just interesting things like this all the time. There's a company in Denmark that we're working with that are brilliant. They want to be the Shopify for small restaurants. Right. And really help small restaurants scale and be contenders to big chains. So I think that that's just a fantastic thing to do. And again, it's thinking about how they can provide those services for it, but they're so focused on what these small restaurants need in order to do the best job that they could possibly do.
Is the common thread in that is that they're this kind of like, they have literally immersed themselves and gone for the deep dive and went, I'm in on kind of like my customers, my users sort of needs and experience and stuff. And so they're just chucking themselves in. They're not making any assumptions. They're just kind of throwing themselves in. Is that the common thread?
Yeah, absolutely. Because there's another company that I've been working with in the US who are developing this app for maternity. So I don't know if you know, in the US, you don't really get any maternity support like we do in the UK. And they've developed this incredible app that allows women access to these services. And the research that they've done, and they've completely, like you said, jumped right in and are understanding what it's like from all angles in order to provide as good a service as possible. And every few weeks, they're so in touch with the people that are using the platform. And I just end up kind of referring to them as like best in class or excellent all the time, because I think what they're doing is brilliant. It's a great service, but also done really, really well.
Yeah.
And, making a difference. So we are working with a lot of brands who are making a difference to people's lives.
And it seems to me that's what you're talking about is like, yeah, the technology is there. Like you say, the technology is developing really fast. And there's all these different things that you can do, and they're all plug and play and stuff. And it doesn't make it necessarily easy, but there's a lot of tools out there that can facilitate this. But it seems to me the key is them, I guess. It
is. And I tell you what's my favourite at the moment. Now you've got me started, you see. But we're seeing so much innovation using WhatsApp. I mentioned it earlier. And for example, working with a huge bank, African-based bank at the moment, who run everything on WhatsApp, and we're helping them work out what the onboarding journey will be via WhatsApp. And like, whether it be a not-for-profit, whether it be an African bank, whether it be a food delivery company in Germany, whether it be a high street retailer servicing, the innovations with WhatsApp are really interesting.
And is that going to WhatsApp sort of, it's going to emulate some of the stuff that, say, we've heard about that's happening, say, on the WeChat type channel, kind of in China, and how some people just run their whole lives on the WeChat platform? It's
not quite as advanced as WeChat, if only. But yeah, some of it's from that. I think some of that. It's about the ubiquity of it and meeting people where they are. And over the last 2 years, that B2B and B2C, it's all kind of blurred now. We're just doing so many interactions on WhatsApp because it's really convenient. I think you can build automation into it. Therefore, it does act as quite a good deflection as long as you do it properly. There are some, I'm not going to name them, but there are some delivery companies in the UK that are using it very, very badly. But not customers of Twilio's, I hasten to add. However, I think that, it's so interesting. Again, give people the tools and let them play with it and see what they come up with, because it's really interesting.
Awesome. And so, Sam, before I kind of I move on to this, of a couple of other questions that I've got, I just wanted to get your broad view on where the kind of the space is at right now. Is there anything that you that you've learned or that stood out over the last kind of I guess year or so that we're working with kind of clients that we've missed out that you'd like to highlight? You go there's this thing as well we hadn't talked about it, but I should mention that too.
I probably will think about that afterwards. But the one thing I would say is it doesn't matter whether they are a startup or a legacy company. We're working with incredible innovation in both. It really never assume that just because somebody is a digital native company that they're going to be more innovative, because it's not true. We're working with a company who is hundreds of years old. And honestly, the attitude they had excitement and commitment towards developing really interesting ways of communicating with their customers was fantastic. I think it forget about the age of a company, forget about the age of the human. It's not about that. It's about this imaginative, creative mindset, I think, and people's willingness to jump in and try something new.
Yeah, no, I think that's kind of fair. I don't know why, but this example kind of popped into my head is that how the kind of innovation is always kind of there. And sometimes you just have to look for the solution. I've always been surprised that I remember, and there's an example there's an outdoor retail brand in the States called REI. And when e-commerce started to really kind of blossom in the sort of the late 90s and things, they were kind of on it, and people were talking about this, that, and the other, and sort of bricks and mortar, and do we have a digital bit and then kind of a retail bit? And I don't know if it was just something to do with their DNA sort of thing. What they ended up doing, they were going, we're going to fuse the two of them things together. So you end up could order from their website, but their ordering system is also kind of linked up to their inventory system in their kind of retail stores. So it wasn't just a warehouse and then shops sort of thing. It was just all the one thing. They're almost using their shops as their warehouses. And so you make an order and they find it somewhere, and then they basically get the shop to ship it to you. How many people are still not doing that?
No.
And that was over 20 years ago. And I think that's the thing is that, and they're quite a reasonably venerable kind of company. They've been around for a while, but it means that, like you say, it's you don't need to be this kind of startup full of kind of young things that are kind of full of zany ideas. It's sometimes people just have to think about the problem a little bit differently.
Yeah. We've on that, actually, two of the most interesting organizations that we work with, both in the financial services sector, both really established, and they've kind of torn up the rule book completely as to how they think about customer service, how they think about their organizational structure. So what they're different companies, what they've both done is kind of torn down all the boundaries for the contact center. They've put teams together who represent more like an agile team. So this one bank in particular, their developers and their analysts sit with their customer service people so that they can hear firsthand and talk about what the customer needs, what problems they've got, how they can do it differently. And then they go away and develop it. And they're shipping code as a bank, they're shipping code faster than probably Amazon is.
Right.
Because that's the approach they've got. Another organisation, again, it's in the financial services sector, but they've grouped around, they self-manage.
Yeah.
So the work comes in, they self-manage. Everything gets done really well, but they've got a really high retention rate of employees who are choosing how to spend their day and what they need to work on as a matter of urgency. Neither of those two on paper, you would hear the names, which I'm not going to reveal, but and think, really?
Yeah.
But no, they've just ripped up the rule book. They've had leadership that's brave enough to go, let's do it differently. Let's try.
Yeah. No, I think it reminds me of another interview I had on the podcast from years ago with a gentleman by the name of Rob Brown, who was working for Aviva at the time, particularly in their pensions department. And they took a systems thinking approach to how they designed their how they dealt with customer demand, as it were. And the standard way is like you'd end up with tier 1, tier 2, kind of like different teams doing different things. And they were a bit like, that doesn't really work. So they basically went, we're going to push everybody to the front, and all the expertise and all the access and all the knowledge and all the tools and everything else. So when a customer comes in and then needs some help, then anybody who picks up the phone is empowered and enabled and supported and trained with the right sort of tools to answer that kind of question in the here and now. And it's like, when you explain it like that, it sounds pretty straightforward, but it's kind of incredible to think that actually that's not the way that most service operations are structured. And their results were kind of phenomenal. Like all the metrics went in all the right kind of directions because employees and agents felt better because they're getting much more varied work and kind of feeling higher skilled and all that type of stuff. And customers loving it because they call in and they don't have to wait and they don't have to get referred and they don't have to do this, that, and the other. And they're like going, I call in, I ask a question, I get the answer, I hang up. Thank you very much.
You reminded me, the best agent I ever heard was at Aviva. Right,
there you go.
And he was a gentleman he was over 60. Mm-hmm. And the way he was able to handle people who, had had a car crash, had all these emergencies in their life was brilliant. And he was just the best agent I've ever heard.
I mean, I think that's the thing is that I think sometimes it's just, I've always kind of like said is that it frustrates me that how often organizations get in the way of their people doing a good job.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes you have to start from the perspective, rather than wanting to control people, you just have to sort of trust people and enable them and then just get out of their way.
I agree.
So stepping back and putting a crystal ball in front of you. And because I wanted to now, because you mentioned all these different brands that you're working with, and you're thinking this visioneering sort of thing, which makes me think of bonfires and dancing under the stars and all that type of stuff. But peer into your crystal ball and tell me, what do you think the future of service and experience looks like, and what do you think some of the biggest challenges we're going to have to navigate are if we're going to succeed?
I think, well, for a start, I think the only way is up. There is a great report that Pega did a little while ago, and they said that they did some research and said 1 in 10 of us cries or nearly cries.
I wrote an article about that.
Did you? Yeah.
It was called "How Many More Customers Have to Cry."
Yeah. Well,
I thought it was astounding.
It is. So the only way is up.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So I think the future is a really good balance between human and non-human. I think it's getting that balance right. Whatever that mix might be, 50-50, 60-40, but it's got to be right for your company and for your customers. And I think that's the difference.
And it will also depend on where they're at on the journey.
Exactly.
So it almost has to be this graphic equalizer type of approach.
It does. And it has to be, and that for me is what personalization is as well. And I know it's such a big word, and I can't believe we've gone this long without mentioning the big P word, but it means many things to many different people. But ultimately, I think it's that, making sure, I think the future, I hope, is making sure that we can get access to humans when we really need them, and that we don't have to think about the relationship too much. And we don't have to get upset, and we don't have to cry. And actually, I also hope, to your points, what you were saying before, I hope we see this whole new wave of leadership which gets out of the way and lets people create the kind of experiences and service that they really want to create for their customers, because that will really be customer centric. And I don't know about you, Adrian, but I get very eye-rolly at the amount of times I hear a company say that they're customer centric and they put customers at the heart of everything they do, when they absolutely do not. Yeah. Letting employees do what they think is right for their customer, I am hopeful that that's the future. And then we'll see. It's not some big fancy, oh my God, it's all automated and there's machine learning everywhere. I don't think it is that. I think it's just far simpler, and getting back to what good service really is, which is being there for people when you really need them to be there, and being accessible and helping them. And brands not being a big feature in our lives, so big that we cry when we can't, out of frustration, because we can't get what we want. So that, for me, I think is what the future is, a really good balance between the two. Strong personalization, not the creepy kind, not the pushy kind, but just that as a customer, you're known, you're acknowledged, you don't have to repeat yourself. It helpful personalization.
Awesome. No, I think that's confined. I mean, so you've given us a big to-do list there, Sam.
Yeah, I know.
So
what's the point in not being ambitious?
Well, no, not at all. Not at all. I'm going to get all Confucian on you, now, and go like, the journey of 1,000 miles starts the first step, and I'll go like, fine. So what's the first step, Sam?
Research. Okay. Research, I think. I think it's really getting to know your customers again, because they will have changed. Mm-hmm. And of course, the past 2 years will have changed people and their needs. And I think companies have to reconnect to what their customers really want from them, what they really need, because it won't be as complicated or as fanciful as they think it will be. Mm-hmm. It will be more straightforward, but you won't know until you ask them.
Can I dig into that kind of word research? Because that's also another big word as well, because it's almost as big as personalization, I'd imagine. And they're P and then R in the alphabet. Yeah, so they'll sit right next to each other. But when you say research, what do you mean? I mean, does that mean that people are just going to we're going to see a spike in sort of like quant and qual surveys kind of going out? What do we actually kind of mean? I mean, we're talking about research as a behavior, or are we talking about research as like something you buy?
I think it is, for me, it's a combination of all things. It's a research plan, but at its heart, you've got to spend time walking in your customer's shoes. You've got to spend your time next to people, observing them, spending the day. What's it like? What are you doing? What are you trying to do? What's it like to live like you for a day? The amount, you'll fill a wall with insights if you do that. And so I think it's a combination of that really good, deep, ethnographic. I've got a lot of friends who are researchers, PhD level researchers, and the work they do is incredible. Mm-hmm. And but often they get squeezed. What can you do in 2 weeks? So I think that there's a place for that. There is a place for, I'm not sure, I think surveys, we're kind of over them, aren't we? Like the response rate is less than 10%, I heard at a conference recently.
I think it's lower than that.
Yeah, I think it is too. So it's not that. It's let's not rely on a customer to do the effort, get out there and do the work. Data plays a part, of course it does. It's the marriage of all of it. But I think that, you've got to do all of it, bring it all together.
I kind of use a phrase that sounds a little bit up its own arse, but I think it's a good way of describing. Some people ask me kind of like, oh, what is it you do? Well, I say one of the parts, the things that I think I do is I do experience anthropology.
Mm.
And that sounds a bit arsey,
Yeah.
but
Visioneering.
yeah. But I think technically it's reasonably accurate.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you just have to go and just try to understand.
Yeah.
But without any assumptions.
Yeah. And it's a skill. It's such a skill to be able to do it. So I think, that's a good starting point. And really taking that research and really taking that intentional service design approach. Again, another very fashionable phrase right now. But you need to. But it all starts in research. All digital.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing I would also kind of like say is that resist the temptation to jump onto the tools, as it were. When somebody says research, they go, oh, it's a survey, or it's qual, or it's quant, or it's this, or it's that, or it's the focus groups, or it's the other. It's like, oh, no. Why don't you sit with the idea and understand what research you need to do?
Yeah.
What are your options in order to help you understand that? Kind of, because, otherwise you're just doing the same thing again, but in a slightly different domain.
I think it's funny. The benefit, I guess, of digital is how fast we can go with it. But it's almost like we need to do the very opposite and go much slower first.
Mm-hmm.
Because by doing that, then we can, because actually the building is almost the easy bit now. The tools, and Twilio has lots of them, but many other companies do too. But the tools are all there to build pretty quickly now.
Mm-hmm.
But really think about what it is that you want to build.
Awesome. Brilliant. So Sam, before we go, I have two final kind of questions I want to ask you. And this is, talking about research, I call this bit my longitudinal social research that I'm doing, which is, again, another RC phrase, which basically says I'm asking kind of people a couple of questions at the end of every interview. But the first one I ask is it's all related to the Punk CX and Punk XL sort of thing. The first one I ask is like, what one or two words would you use to describe a more punk approach to customer experience? Now, I must point out, I've been doing this since 2019 maybe, and I've got a list of about 150 different words. So,
I mean, it's inevitable I'll repeat one that you've already got. I think being punk with CX is being really imaginative.
Ooh. I'm not sure that's on there, but
yes.
Like one of the previous kind of guests I had on the show was a guy called kind of Vasily Triant, and he's the COO across at UJet, and he gave me the word. He said us.
Ooh.
Which I really liked.
I like that too.
And I was like, oh, that's totally not on that list, but I really like it.
I like it.
Because it's like, to your point, it's the inclusive thing, right?
Yeah. Huh. I like that.
But I like the imaginative one as well, because I don't know if that's on there either. So that seems also kind of really obvious too. Mm. But that's nice. I love it. Mm. Cool. Anyway, so there we go. Moving on to the second one. So what company? So the follow-up book to Punk CX was Punk XL. It's the idea about, I think we need to start talking about experience leadership and what it means. It's insufficient to talk about just customer experience in isolation anymore. Mm. And so I wanted to ask you, what company or brand do you think is an experience leader and why?
Now, this brand might surprise you. And I'm not saying they're perfect, but their intentions are good, and intentions will get you a long way. Mm-hmm. I have been a customer of the NatWest for 36 years now. And they are doing so much to really think about their customers. It's in their annual report, which I read during lockdown. What else was I going to do during lockdown? But it's also a thing. I had to do a big transaction. I had to do a really big transaction during lockdown. So I'm buying a house, and went in there in the branch where they were like, "Oh, we're so busy." It's like, "Why are you so busy?" They said, "Because we've got so many people coming in worried about scams and fraud, and said, and no other high street branch is open. So we're helping the customers of every other branch.
Right.
And I was like, God love them.
Wow.
And I see all these little ways that the NatWest are trying every day to be really customer focused. So I'm not sure if you've ever had them as an example before, but I see a lot of goodness in them and what they're trying to do.
Awesome. I mean, no, I don't think I've had them before, but and that's a good shout out for them. But thank you for that. I mean, and Sam, thank you for sharing your time and your kind of insight and your perspective kind of with us. I mean, but that's all I have today. So we're done. Thank you.
Thank you.
And hopefully that wasn't kind of like too onerous.
No, I think I could talk to you for days, even without ranting.
Well, I'm going to switch off record now. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Well, that was cool. I hope you enjoyed it. I did, and I always do actually, because I always learn something new when I speak to some of these amazing kind of people. And it's always something new that I can incorporate into my writing, speaking, workshops, and other sort of advisory work that I do. Now, if you're interested in learning about any of that sort of stuff, then you can find out more about how I work with clients over at adrianswinscoe.com. But one final thing before I go, please consider heading over to iTunes or Spotify or whichever podcast platform you choose to use, and do leave a review. Every little helps, as they say. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you for listening, and do tune in again soon. All the very best. Cheers. Bye.